Today we're going to talk about Egyptian warfare. We'll talk about Egyptian weapons in ancient times and the evolution of the sort of materials used to produce weapons of war. We will talk about Egyptian armor, Egyptian shields, and battle strategies. Now, at the end of this video, I will have some curious Apple magic. What I mean by that? You'll see. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. Well, over their long history, the Egyptians have employed a whole variety of different weapons. Soldiers would be equipped with spears, shields, cudgels, maces, daggers, swords, bows, arrows. On the other hand, battle axes and quivers came during the Second Intermediary Period, which was a time of utter change and innovation in Egyptian warfare. We are in 4000 BC. By this time, the Egyptians had started to import obsidian from eastern Red Sea areas. Obsidian is a fascinating naturally occurring volcanic glass with translucent optical properties. Vitreous luster, deep black or blackish green color, and it forms on an extrusive igneous rock. It is produced when felsic lava extruded from a volcano cools rapidly with minimal crystal growth. For those who don't know, felsic means or refers to igneous rock, in other words magmatic rock, that are relatively rich in feldspar and quartz, as opposed to mafic rocks, which are richer in magnesium and iron. This glassstone could have a very sharp point. By the time Upper and Lower Egypt were united, in 3150 BC, the Egyptians had already been using bronze weapons for spearhead, axes, and maces. Also, during this period, a new kind of bow came into use, the composite bow, introduced by the Hyksos. In the following centuries, weapons started to be standardized under pharaoh's control, producing stockpiles of arsenals. Obsidian was exchanged for bronze in 2000 BC, and finally, domestically produced iron arrowheads began to appear in 1000 BC. The bow was the main armament of the Egyptians, so bowmen, archers were the primary force of pharaonic armies, followed by spearmen. Numidian mercenaries formed the best archer units. There were mainly two kinds of archers: foot archers and chariot archers. The infantry of the New Kingdom carried spears, battle axes, sickle swords, and daggers, but it must be kept in mind that often archers also would carry a spear to use in case they would run out of arrows. The bowmen had the duty of sort of softening up the enemy by dealing severe casualties from distance. The infantry would then rush in, breaking ranks in hand-to-hand combat. The spear was the favored weapon because it was easier for soldiers to become proficient with it, and it granted a reach advantage. The usage of bronze in the Middle Kingdom and iron in the New Kingdom, and above all during the late dynastic period, increased dramatically the military capability of Egyptian armies. Although, while Egypt produced at least part of the copper it needed, it had to import all the tin required for the production of bronze, and had to import all the iron. The weapons could be manufactured and stored in royal armories. Impact weapons: the club, the mace. Edged weapons: the axe, the sword, the spear. Missile weapons: the javelin, the bow and arrow, the slingshot. Protective equipment: shields, helmets, and body armor. So, there were two different kinds of battle axes in Egyptian warfare. We've got the cutting axe and the piercing axe. Now, two things to say about the cutting axe is that, of course, we would have a blade fastened onto a sizable handle, and it would be used for two purposes: to attack unarmored fighters or opponents or combatants, and of course that would represent the majority of soldiers in Egyptian warfare, because we have to consider that in African warfare the usage of armor wasn't that common, considering the weather, of course, that you would have. There were some kinds of body armor, and we will talk about these briefly on this video, but suffice to say that the majority of soldiers wouldn't be wearing armor. So these sort of axes, the cutting axes, were used against unarmored soldiers, and then they would be used to finish off and cut into pieces wounded soldiers who had received a shower of arrows from the bowmen. So these were the two strategic usages of cutting axes. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got piercing axes. So those axes that were used against armored opponents. So they had a completely different shape, and they were used to penetrate armor. And apparently they were mostly used to penetrate helmets. Egyptian swords. Now, Egyptian swords are interesting because, differently from all other weapons that they used, swords came into usage after the introduction of metal. So in other words, there are no predecessors of swords made of, for example, stone, obsidian, or any other kind of material. Swords are contemporary with the usage of metal. Now, of course, the khopesh is probably the most representative of Egyptian swords, but it suffices to say that, early swords also had a handle made of ivory, and most of the times Egyptian swords would be curved, as opposed to the swords of the sea people, which would be straight and double-edged. Now, what's interesting is that we do have accounts of the fact that Egyptians would employ or deploy both kinds of units. You would have units, mercenary units, that would use straight and double-edged swords, which will be longer, and actual Egyptian native units of infantry, which would use the khopesh or other kinds of curved and shorter swords. And the way they would be used, if we can give credit to the sort of contemporary representations, then the way they would be used, particularly by the army of Ramses III, is that first the Shurdan and Philistine mercenaries with their longer and straight double-edged swords would impact the enemy, and after then the Egyptian native troops would come in to finish them off, cutting them into pieces with their curved swords. However, the khopesh will become out of fashion by the 19th dynasty. We can date the usage of shields to the second millennium in Egypt, although we have several different kinds of shields. We've got very tall and very big shields that were given or issued to infantry to protect their whole body. So we're talking about men-height shields, and these would be made of wood, sometimes covered in leather and rawhide. They were mostly used to protect soldiers from arrows, as again, most soldiers wouldn't be wearing armor. So these shields would be their only line of defense against showers of arrows. But troops that had to engage in hand-to-hand combat most of the times against other hand-to-hand combat units would then start switching to smaller shields that would have a wooden handle at the back. We do also have representations of mentions of shields made of bronze, but it seems like the wooden shields would most of the times be preferred, because at the end of the day, a metal shield is heavier and harder to use. It's more clumsy to use. Wooden shield reinforced with leather and rawhide is already pretty good protection from arrows and blows. Helmets as well are a difficult one. We know the mercenaries did wear metal helmets, but most of the times in almost all iconography, Egyptian warriors are represented without any protection for the head, without any helmet. The only exception being the pharaoh. And again, the pharaoh will be an exception as far as armor is concerned, because the pharaoh has been seen represented both with protection for the head and scale armor. Soldiers' armor, which would be leather armor or broad leather bands as the only form of protection or body armor used by Egyptian soldiers, it would never cover the legs. And that's because infantry will be using a shield or a large shield, whereas other kinds of warrior would be fighting on chariot, and a chariot is already providing defense for your legs, and that was the case also for the pharaoh's armor. Okay, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please remember thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. And this is just the beginning of a new big series about Egyptian warfare and culture, and also language. And what about the apple then? Yes, I'm going to show you the apple magic. So this is a footage or some footage or a clip from the time that I was living in Japan, where I did something interesting with an apple. Now, see what I do, and then you try it, and let me know if you can do the same thing at home. Ringo da. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Hold on a minute, I am a doctor.